North Korea has once again defied the international community.
And this missile is more advanced, longer range, and can probably carry a heavier payload. The terrorism list decision has infuriated Pyongyang.
An Icbm that can threaten the entire United States. It could be today, it could be next week.
The sanctions are not going to get the job done.
And under this administration, there's more consideration of a preventive military attack.
Launching a war to prevent a war is oxymoronic.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. We bring you insights and analysis on North Korea issues every week from Washington, D.C. This week, we will first discuss North Korea's latest missile test, which was its first in 10 weeks. North Korea called its Hwasong-15 missile the most powerful yet and said the entire U.S. mainland is within range.
화성-15형 시험 발사가 성공적으로 진행되었다.
Higher, frankly, than any previous shot they've taken. It's a research and development effort on their part to continue building ballistic missiles.
Nothing changed. Nothing changed. We have a very serious approach, and nothing changed. We take it very seriously.
Now joining me today, Mr. Frank Januzzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation and who served as an advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Good morning.
Good morning. And also my guest today, Mr. Bruce Klinner, senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and who also spent 20 years in the intelligence community. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Frank, let me begin with you. North Korea released photos of Hwasong-15 and experts were surprised by the size, how huge it was, and also they noted that there were 2 engines. So how concerned should we be about this missile?
Well, this is the latest evolution of their missile capability. With each test, with each new missile they roll out, we see an expansion of the range, expansion of the payload, expansion of the overall capability. And this missile is more advanced, longer range, and can probably carry a heavier payload farther than any that they have ever tested before. We shouldn't expect these missile tests to stop, maybe not ever, absent some kind of a political deal that compels them or convinces them to stop with their testing. But this is just the latest of a long string of tests.
And Bruce, what did you notice about this missile that was different from before?
Well, given its sheer size and including the size of the nose cone, so there's less concern about whether, more concern that they don't need to miniaturize a warhead, so that it's likely that they will more nearly complete the development of an Icbm that can threaten the entire United States with a nuclear warhead.
Bruce is right about the nose cone. I mean, it's so large that they could even potentially have room for multiple warheads if they were small enough, or decoys or other systems designed to make it harder for us to intercept a warhead.
Right, and there's, in my view, been a tendency over the decades to downplay or dismiss North Korea's capabilities, where even when North Korea achieves a success, people still tend to often, well, but I don't think they've proved that they've miniaturized or developed a warhead. I think that's really quibbling at the edges, and now as we see scientists and experts continue to be surprised by North Korea's achievements, it's often because they've been downplaying the possibility of North Korea achieving exactly what it claims it will do.
I think we all agree that North Korea made great advancements in technology. Then how far are we, Bruce, from North Korea having a workable, deployable missile, nuclear missile?
We don't know. It could be today, it could be next week, it could be next month or next year, but we're very close to endgame on that ability. So again, people are trying to, split hairs on the exact day when they have it, or sort of, postpone relevant action in response by saying, well, we're not there yet, let's not do something.
There's not going to be a bright red line between having the capability and not having the capability. I don't think there's ever going to be a moment when the United States can say, aha, now we really know they've done it. I think it's safe to assume that they have the capability today. And with every test that they make, their confidence level, their technological capability is going to increase. But we need to adapt ourselves to the reality that we're facing with North Korea. In all likelihood, they can today lob a nuclear-tipped missile and hit the United States. So we need to wrap our brains around that and develop a strategy to address it.
Frank said there is a political motivation and that North Korea will continue to do missile testing. There was a pause of 10 weeks before North Korea did this test. So what do you think was the reason behind that, Bruce? Was it because that there had some political motivations, or did they need some time to hone their technology?
We really don't know why North Korea does or doesn't do something, so I think it's more important to focus on the action rather than our perception of the objective or the timing of that action. With this launch hiatus, what we saw was on the one side, supporters of President Trump saying it was the president's firm, resolute actions and words which were deterring North Korea from launching. And on the other end, we saw people who were very much more in favor of engagement saying this was a signal from North Korea that they were holding back, that they were once again hoping the U.S. would respond to the signal. I thought both views were incorrect, and it was really something much more anodyne. It was really more of a seasonal or cyclical result, is that North Korea has always tested fewer missiles in the fourth quarter of a year than the first 3 quarters of a year. So I thought it was simply a case of wait for it, you know they're going to do it.
Well, we may not know the motivation of any particular action, I would agree, but I think we do understand the motivation at the core, which is regime survival and the desire of North Korea to be essentially immunized against the threat that they perceive from the United States. They look at Muammar Gaddafi, who gave up his WMD programs and was deposed. They look at Saddam Hussein, who gave up his WMD programs and was deposed, and they don't want to follow in their footsteps. So any particular missile launch could be due to any number of factors, the technological, the seasonal, the anniversaries of important birthdays and all the rest. But the underlying motivation, I think, is very clear.
Frank, do you think there is an opening for an opportunity for talks with North Korea now that North Korea has more levers to bring to the table?
I think there was an opening that closed on the day that the president announced that he was putting North Korea back on the terrorism list. I think there had been a period of calm. There had been robust U.S. military exercises. There had been a visit by a Chinese special envoy to Pyongyang. And I think all the pieces were in place to resume dialogue. I think now we're going to have to wait because the terrorism list decision has infuriated Pyongyang. They have now tested this Hwasong-15. There's going to be a response, probably from the UN Security Council, as well as from the U.S. and our allies. So we're back to square one, and it may be months before another opportunity presents itself.
Well, I would say, we need to focus on the action. I mean, it's sort of like someone robbed a bank. Why did they rob it on Tuesday or Wednesday? It doesn't matter. Why did they rob it? Was it money to impress someone? Because society's to blame, they didn't have enough hugs as a child. We don't know. They robbed a bank. That's what you should focus on and determine your response to it. So North Korea has once again defied the international community. They violated 10 or 11 UN Security Council's resolutions. They've clearly shown through their actions and their words that, as they've said, the six-party talks is dead. They're null and void. They have no intention of denuclearizing, I would add, under present circumstances. When U.S. officials, both in this administration and previous administrations, have tried simply to have dialogue, North Korea refused, even pointing out, the New York channel is closed, you shouldn't be calling us. North Korea literally doesn't pick up the phone at the military hotline in the Joint Security Area and the West Sea Inter-Korean hotline. So they've shown that they're not interested in dialogue, not only the talks, but even rejecting diplomatic attempts to reach out to them, not only in the U.S., but also South Korea.
Bruce, on that point, on the reaction from the U.S. government, it seems the U.S. government is now looking at maritime interdictions and cutting off oil supplies. Why are these two areas being looked at right now?
Well, on the maritime interdiction, under the more recent UN resolutions, now all cargo going into and out of North Korea is supposed to be inspected. Obviously, that would include land transportation across the Yalu River with China or with Russia, but also by air transport or ships. But all of the resolutions have been done under authority of what's called Chapter 7, Article 41, which precludes the U.S. Or any Navy or law enforcement or Coast Guard from interdicting a ship suspected of having contraband on the high seas. We've always been pushing for what's called Article 42, which would allow law enforcement and others to intercept a ship that we think is carrying nuclear material, missiles, et cetera. But China has always rejected that. So perhaps what the U.S. is going to try to do is have an international consortium like we did with the Proliferation Security Initiative under the George W. Bush administration to, whether it's intercept or inspect ships that we think are suspected of carrying something.
Mm-hmm. And Frank, what is your suggestion to the U.S. government? What should they do? How should they react to North Korea's latest missile test?
Well, there's going to be a pressure response, and I think that's appropriate. And I also think it's really important to try to tighten enforcement of sanctions, because it's obvious that the sanctions have utterly failed either to prevent North Korea from continuing to develop their missiles and nukes, or from crippling their economy. Their economy is growing, not shrinking. But at the end of the day, the sanctions are not going to get the job done. There's no way that China is going to impose sanctions severe enough to cripple North Korea. There has to be engagement. The only periods when we have had any progress with North Korea on their nuclear program have been periods where we have sat down with them and tried to understand the underlying motivations of the North Koreans. I think it's important to figure out why they're doing what they're doing. We're focused on stopping their capabilities, and we're ignoring the underlying causes of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula.
Bruce, what do you think should be the way forward?
Well, in Washington, the debate has often devolved into this binary pressure or engagement. And the reality is there are two sides of the same coin. We should have a comprehensive, integrated strategy using all the instruments of national power, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. So, beyond that sort of false debate of one or the other, we do need to more fully enforce U.S. law and international law. We should more fully enforce required UN resolutions. We should also try to influence North Korea's business partners to move away from engaging with them economically by pointing out that their own reputation is being linked to this regime. So, we should be doing that, but also having military defenses for ourselves and our allies, and have the door open for diplomacy, certainly, if not a return to negotiations yet.
Well, we're going to have to wrap our first discussion here, and we'll move on to our second topic. Hawaii this week resumed monthly statewide testing of nuclear attack warning sirens for the first time in 30 years, the first U.S. state to prepare for the possibility of a nuclear strike by North Korea.
This morning, there was another missile launch from North Korea.
Now, with this additional threat, we want to ask the public to be ready.
Basic guidance again, if you hear this, is get inside, and stay tuned.
Now, this is a siren sound. Does this ring a bell? Do you remember any time in your lifetime, have you ever done a siren drill before?
Look, growing up in Texas, we used to have duck and cover exercises where we would get under the desks to prepare for a possible Soviet nuclear attack. There's no getting ready for a nuclear attack. The North Koreans have tested a nuclear device 20 times the size of Hiroshima. There's no preparing for it. There's no evacuating for it. So these kinds of drills, to be honest, they're pointless. They might create some false sense of security on the part of residents of Hawaii or other places that engage in them. But there's a reason why in South Korea, under artillery threat, nuclear threat, missile threat, why they don't have these drills on a daily basis, because they don't work. A war with North Korea is going to be catastrophic. And these kinds of civil defense drills, to me, are a feel-good exercise for government so that they can feel like, well, we're doing something. If a nuclear missile lands on Honolulu, there's not going to be anything left of Honolulu.
Bruce, is this a feel-good exercise? Have you ever had an experience?
In my childhood back in Connecticut, we had duck and cover exercises, so it does bring back memories. On the one hand, it seems like, well, if a local establishment wants to, as part of their civil defense, take measures to practice measures against a nuclear attack or a tsunami or earthquake, that's certainly their prerogative and certainly good planning. On the other hand, it does sort of, perhaps give a false sense of security. I would argue that ballistic missile defense systems deployed to Hawaii would be more effective, but also in conjunction with civil defense. And in South Korea, they do practice, response to a North Korean attack, though I think most of the citizens tend to ignore it. But I think perhaps the bigger trend that may be more worrisome is, the feeling that under this administration there's more consideration of a preventive military attack, not preemption or retaliatory, as has always been U.S. strategy, but the idea of initiating a military attack on North Korea to prevent them from completing an Icbm development. I think that's a very worrisome development, and I think it's really more a case of initiating a war to prevent a war.
What do you think
well,
about
it's an
this
area where
position?
Bruce and I agree. Launching a war to prevent a war is oxymoronic. The goal of U.S. policy should be to prevent a war on the Korean Peninsula. And we need to understand that when we are focused on their capabilities instead of the underlying cause of what is a conflict, an unresolved conflict on the Korean Peninsula for 70 years, we're really aiming at the wrong target. And this preventive war concept is all part of a normalization that I think is really concerning. The American people should be worried if the government is trying to make war with North Korea seem like a normal, rational, doable, winnable thing.
It seems like both of you are against this idea of or raising concerns about preventive war, but how should we interpret this result from a Gallup poll in September showed 58% of Americans surveyed were actually supporting military action against North Korea if peaceful means fail, and this number is 10% jump from 2003. What is the sentiment among the general public in America?
Well, I think there's oftentimes, if you explain a situation more fully, then that can really have a big impact on people's responses. I've been asked the same question often on interviews, and when I point out that when I was in the government, we did many war games and military exercises, and the alliance always won, but it was always at the cost of hundreds of thousands of casualties, and that was before we thought North Korea had nuclear weapons. North Korea can already target Seoul with 25 million people, Tokyo with 35 million people. So as Secretary of Defense Mattis and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dunford, has pointed out, this would be horrific. Now, we would have to do a retaliatory response, or if necessary, a preemptive response if we felt North Korea was about to attack us with nuclear weapons. But we should not very quickly, as Shakespeare said, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war.
A recent Pew poll showed that more than 80% of the American people support a diplomatic solution to the North Korean nuclear crisis. And I think that the fact that the American people, if diplomacy fails, would be willing to contemplate military action should not be a surprise. And in fact, if we were threatened with imminent attack, I think overwhelmingly the American people would want the U.S. government to do whatever it needed to do to defend us.
Right.
But we shouldn't confuse that with a strong preference of the American people in favor of a diplomatic solution.
Now time for the photo moment, a time to look at an intriguing North Korea picture. Now the picture this week, a woman and a child holding hands and walking down the Mire Scientist Street in central Pyongyang. This is an upscale neighborhood opened in 2015 with luxurious apartment buildings. Frank, what is your reaction to this picture?
Pyongyang is a modern city in many respects, and Kim Jong-un, the leader, is committed to economic development. And he's extremely proud of this miracle avenue. He is arguably as proud of it as he is of the missile accomplishments.
Bruce, what is your reaction?
I'd have two reactions. One is, of course, North Korean parents love their children. And then on economics, much has been made of Kim Jong-un's Byungjin policy, that it's totally different from the past. As Kim Jong-un said in 2013, it is a continuation and building on a 1962 decision by his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, to jointly follow both economic development and military development. So as in the 1960s when they began their nuclear weapons program and sometime after that their missile program, they are trying to have guns and butter. So the butter is fine, it's the guns we have trouble with.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thank you for joining us, Frank.
Thank
Bruce.
you. Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for having us.
And this was Washington Talk from VOA, and I'm Eun Jang Cho. See you next week.